Go and get me firewood. You must finish all the chores before you eat anything in this house. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by lush green hills and whispering forests, there lived a boy named Eli. His life began in joy, cradled in the warmth of his mother's arms and guided by the gentle hands of his father. But fate had other plans for the young boy. When he was barely 2 years old, his mother succumbed to an illness that swept through the village like a relentless storm. A few months later, his father, unable to bear the loss of his beloved wife, followed her into eternity, leaving behind only memories and a fragile son. With no one else to care for him, Eli was sent to live with his Aunt Clara, his mother's sister, a woman whose heart had grown cold after years of disappointment and bitterness. To Clara, taking in Eli was not an act of love or duty but a burden thrust upon her unwilling shoulders. She resented every moment spent caring for her late sister's child, viewing him as a constant reminder of what she perceived as her own misfortunes. Her husband, a miserly man obsessed with wealth, further fueled her resentment, constantly reminding her of the extra mouth they now had to feed. Eli arrived at Aunt Clara's home on a dreary autumn morning, clutching a small bundle of clothes given to him by his neighbors. The house itself was modest, its walls cracked and its roof patched with makeshift materials. It stood at the edge of the village, far from the bustling marketplaces and lively gatherings where laughter often echoed. From the moment he stepped inside, Eli felt the oppressive weight of silence and disdain that hung over the household like a thick fog. Clara greeted him with a curt nod, her sharp eyes scanning the boy as though sizing up a stray animal rather than her own flesh and blood. "You'll be expected to earn your keep," she declared without preamble, her voice devoid of warmth. Those words became the mantra of Eli's new life, one filled with labor, neglect, and unrelenting cruelty. From the day Eli arrived at Clara's home, his childhood was stripped away, replaced by endless toil and neglect. At just 6 years old, he was forced to rise before sunrise to fetch water from the distant well, carrying heavy buckets that strained his small frame. By mid-morning, he would chop wood for the fire, his tiny hands blistered and bleeding from the rough axes. Afternoons were spent scrubbing floors until they gleamed, sweeping courtyards until not a speck of dust remained, and tending to the garden where vegetables barely grew due to poor soil and lack of care. Clara's demands knew no bounds. If the chores weren't completed to her exacting standards, Eli faced punishment, sometimes verbal abuse, sometimes physical. On one particularly harsh winter morning, when the well's water had frozen solid, Eli returned empty-handed after hours of futile effort. Clara's reaction was swift and merciless. "Lazy good-for-nothing," she spat, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "If you can't even bring water, what use are you?" The blow struck deep, not just physically but emotionally. Over time, Eli learned to suppress his tears, knowing that showing vulnerability only invited more ridicule. Yet, despite the pain, he never lost his inherent kindness. He still shared scraps of food with the stray animals that wandered into the yard, whispered comforting words to the chickens when they seemed frightened, and smiled shyly at the rare passerby who dared to acknowledge him. Clara's children, twins named Greta and Lars, were older than Eli by several years and took great delight in tormenting him. They saw him as an easy target, someone beneath them in every way. Greta often mocked his worn-out clothes, calling him names like Rag Boy, and laughing whenever he tripped or stumbled under the weight of his burdens. Lars, equally cruel, enjoyed pushing him around, stealing his meals, and hiding his tools so he couldn't finish his tasks on time. One evening, as Eli trudged back from the fields with a sack of harvested potatoes, Lars appeared out of nowhere, snatching the sack from his hands and dumping its contents onto the muddy path. "Look at this little slave," Lars sneered, kicking the potatoes aside. "Can't even carry his load properly." Before Eli could protest, Greta joined in, throwing insults and jeers that cut deeper than any whip ever could. Tears welled up in Eli's eyes, but he swallowed them down, picking up the scattered potatoes one by one. He knew better than to fight back. Retaliation would only lead to worse consequences from their mother. Instead, he retreated into himself, finding solace in the quiet moments when no one was watching, the hum of the wind through the trees, the chirping of crickets at night, or the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the cracks in his tiny bedroom. Despite the hardships, Eli's spirit refused to break completely. There were fleeting instances of happiness, though they were rare. Once, during a brief lull in his chores, he discovered a patch of wildflowers growing near the stream. Their vibrant colors, yellows, purples, and pinks, seemed almost magical against the dull backdrop of his existence. For a few precious minutes, he forgot about the world pressing down on him and simply marveled at the beauty around him. But such moments were fleeting, and reality always came crashing back. One day, while mending a torn fence, Eli accidentally nicked his finger with a rusty nail. Blood trickled down his hand, but instead of offering comfort, Clara scolded him for being careless. "Now look what you've done," she barked. "That wound could get infected, and then we'll have to waste money on medicine because of your clumsiness." Without cleaning the wound herself, she ordered Eli to tend to it alone, leaving him to suffer through the pain and risk of infection. As the years passed, Eli grew taller and stronger, but the scars of his childhood lingered, both visible and invisible. His body bore marks from falls, burns, and beatings, while his heart carried the weight of unspoken sorrow. Yet, through it all, he clung to hope, a faint glimmer that someday, somehow, things might change. That somewhere beyond the confines of Aunt Clara's oppressive home lay a brighter future waiting for him. And perhaps, unbeknownst to him, that future was closer than he imagined. Little did Eli know that a chance encounter in the forest would set him on a path toward redemption and transformation, proving that even the darkest days could give way to light. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Eli set out to gather firewood from the forest, a task he performed almost daily. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and damp soil. Though the work was grueling, Eli found solace in the quiet solitude of the woods. It was one of the few places where he could escape the harshness of Aunt Clara's home and let his mind wander freely. As he ventured deeper into the forest, something unusual caught his eye, a patch of disturbed earth near the base of an ancient oak tree. Curiosity piqued, Eli approached cautiously, brushing aside the layer of leaves covering the ground. Beneath them, he uncovered a weathered wooden chest, its surface etched with intricate carvings that spoke of another time. His heart raced as he realized this wasn't just any ordinary object, it seemed like something valuable, perhaps even buried deliberately. With trembling hands, Eli pried open the heavy lid. Inside, nestled among layers of dust and cobwebs, lay treasures beyond his wildest imagination, glittering jewels, gold coins stacked neatly in piles, and an ancient map rolled up carefully at the bottom. For a moment, he simply stared, overwhelmed by the sight. The wealth contained within the chest could change his life forever, freeing him from the tyranny of Aunt Clara and her family. But then reality struck him hard. This wasn't his to keep. The chest had been hidden here for years, likely belonging to someone else or tied to the history of the land. Taking it would mean betraying the values his parents had instilled in him before their untimely deaths, values of honesty, integrity, and fairness. After all, how could he claim something that didn't belong to him? Eli closed the chest gently, feeling a mixture of disappointment and resolve. He knew what he had to do. Gathering his courage, he decided to report his discovery to the rightful owner of the land where the chest was found. That evening, after finishing his chores, he carried the chest back to the village and sought out the local authorities, who directed him to the estate of Mr. Hawthorne. Mr. Hawthorne was a reclusive billionaire, whose name whispered through the village like a legend. Once a prominent figure in the business world, he had withdrawn from public life following a series of personal tragedies, including the loss of his fortune due to betrayal. Few dared approach him, fearing his stern demeanor and sharp tongue. Nevertheless, driven by duty and integrity, Eli made his way to the grand mansion perched atop a hill overlooking the village. The journey to the estate was daunting. The road wound steeply upward, flanked by towering trees that cast long shadows across the path. By the time Eli reached the gates, his legs ached, and his arms strained under the weight of the chest. A gatekeeper emerged from a small guardhouse, eyeing him suspiciously. "What business do you have here, boy?" the man asked gruffly. "I've come to return something I found," Eli replied, holding up the chest cautiously. "It was buried in the woods near your property." The gatekeeper raised an eyebrow, but signaled for Eli to enter. As he stepped inside, the sheer opulence of the estate took his breath away. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath, arched ceilings adorned with elaborate frescoes. Ornate chandeliers hung from above, casting shimmering light onto gilded furnishings, and shelves lined with countless books. Despite its grandeur, however, the mansion felt cold and unwelcoming, as though it mirrored the personality of its owner. Eventually, Eli was led to Mr. Hawthorne himself, a tall, imposing figure with piercing eyes and a commanding presence. Seated behind a massive desk carved from dark wood, the billionaire regarded Eli with interest. "What is this about?" Mr. Hawthorne demanded, his voice deep and authoritative. Taking a deep breath, Eli recounted everything, the chest, its contents, and why he had brought it back. As he spoke, Mr. Hawthorne listened intently, his expression softening ever so slightly. When Eli finished, the billionaire regarded him thoughtfully. "You're either incredibly foolish or remarkably honest," Mr. Hawthorne said finally. "I'll reward you for your trouble, but know this: I don't tolerate liars or thieves." With that, Mr. Hawthorne handed Eli a modest sum of money and dismissed him. But as Eli left the mansion, little did he know that this encounter would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Days turned into weeks, and Eli returned to his routine of hard labor under Aunt Clara's roof. However, one afternoon, a carriage pulled up outside their humble home. Out stepped Mr. Hawthorne, flanked by two servants. He requested to speak with Eli privately. "Your honesty impressed me," Mr. Hawthorne began without preamble. "I believe you possess qualities worth cultivating. Would you consider working for me?" Eli was stunned. A job at the estate? It sounded too good to be true. After some hesitation, he agreed, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of his aunt's home. That evening, as he packed his few belongings, Aunt Clara erupted in anger. "How dare you leave us?" she shouted, slamming her fist on the table. "You'll abandon us just like everyone else." Her words stung, but Eli stood firm. This was his chance to break free from the cycle of abuse and hardship. With a heavy heart, but renewed determination, he boarded the carriage bound for the estate, unaware of the challenges and opportunities that awaited him. At the estate, Eli was assigned simple tasks at first, cleaning stables and assisting the gardeners. But Mr. Hawthorne observed him closely, noting his diligence and willingness to learn. Over time, Eli earned the trust of the staff and gradually took on more responsibilities. He proved himself indispensable, earning not only Mr. Hawthorne's respect, but also the admiration of those around him. For the first time in his life, Eli felt valued, not as a servant, but as a person with potential. Life at Mr. Hawthorne's estate was unlike anything Eli had ever experienced. The days were long and demanding, but they were also filled with opportunities for learning and growth. At first, Eli was assigned menial tasks, cleaning stables, tending to the gardens, and assisting the kitchen staff. Though these jobs were physically exhausting, they offered a sense of purpose he hadn't known under Aunt Clara's roof. As weeks turned into months, Mr. Hawthorne began to notice Eli's diligence and work ethic. Unlike many of the other servants who grumbled about their duties, Eli approached each task with quiet determination. He swept floors until they gleamed, mended fences with care, and even helped repair broken tools when no one else bothered to try. His efforts did not go unnoticed. One day, as Eli worked tirelessly in the garden, Mr. Hawthorne appeared unexpectedly, observing him from a distance. "You've been here for nearly 6 months," the billionaire remarked, his voice calm but piercing. "Do you enjoy this kind of labor?" Eli paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's hard work, sir, but it feels right. I like knowing that what I do makes a difference." Mr. Hawthorne nodded approvingly. "Good. But there's more to life than manual labor. If you're willing, I'll teach you skills that will serve you well beyond sweeping floors." Eli's heart leapt at the offer. "I'd be honored, sir." From that moment on, Eli's responsibilities expanded. Under Mr. Hawthorne's guidance, he began learning accounting, bookkeeping, and basic business management. These lessons took place in the evenings, after his daily chores were completed. Sitting at a small desk in the library, Eli pored over ledgers and financial statements, struggling at first but gradually grasping complex concepts. Mr. Hawthorne pushed him relentlessly, challenging him to think critically and solve problems creatively. Though the workload increased, Eli thrived under the pressure. For the first time in his life, he felt intellectually stimulated, discovering talents he never knew he possessed. Yet, despite his progress, challenges remained. Some of the older employees resented Eli's rapid advancement, whispering behind his back and undermining his efforts whenever possible. One servant, a bitter man named Thomas, went so far as to sabotage Eli's work, hiding important documents or tampering with accounts to make them appear incorrect. When Mr. Hawthorne confronted Eli about the discrepancies, the boy hesitated before speaking the truth. "Someone has been tampering with my records, sir," he admitted cautiously. "But I don't know who." Mr. Hawthorne studied him carefully, then nodded. I suspected as much. Rest assured, I'll address the matter. In the meantime, focus on your work and let me handle the rest. True to his word, Mr. Hawthorne investigated the issue discreetly, eventually uncovering Thomas's deceit. The saboteur was dismissed without hesitation, leaving Eli both relieved and grateful for his mentor's support. While Eli continued his studies and labors, the ancient map he had discovered in the forest remained tucked away in Mr. Hawthorne's study. Over time, the billionaire grew increasingly intrigued by its origins, poring over its markings and symbols late into the night. One evening, he called Eli into the study and gestured toward the map. "This artifact may hold the key to restoring part of my lost fortune," Mr. Hawthorne explained. "But deciphering it requires two things, knowledge and courage. Are you prepared to help me?" Eli nodded eagerly. "Of course, sir." Together, they embarked on a quest to unlock the map's secrets. Days turned into nights as they pored over historical texts, consulting experts in cartography and archaeology. Slowly, patterns emerged. The map pointed to a hidden cache of treasures buried deep within an abandoned mine outside the village. Excited yet cautious, Mr. Hawthorne assembled a small team to accompany them on the expedition. The journey to the mine was arduous, requiring hours of travel through treacherous terrain. Along the way, Eli proved invaluable, using his sharp mind and resourcefulness to overcome obstacles. When heavy rains threatened to flood their path, he devised a makeshift bridge using fallen branches and ropes. When supplies ran low, he hunted for food and gathered wild herbs to supplement their meals. Finally, they reached the entrance to the mine, a dark, foreboding cavern shrouded in mystery. Armed with lanterns and tools, the group ventured inside, navigating narrow tunnels and dodging loose rocks. At last, they discovered the treasure, a trove of gold, jewels, and artifacts worth a king's ransom. Mr. Hawthorne gazed upon the haul with a mixture of triumph and melancholy. "This belongs to us now," he said softly. "But remember, wealth carries responsibility. How we use it defines who we are." With the recovered treasure, Mr. Hawthorne invested heavily in rebuilding his businesses, expanding his empire once again. Recognizing Eli's contributions, he promoted him to a position of trust, making him a junior partner in several ventures. Overnight, Eli's life transformed. No longer was he just a servant, he was a respected member of society, earning admiration from those who once doubted him. Yet, success brought its own set of challenges. Adjusting to his new role required patience and humility. Eli struggled initially with the trappings of wealth, finding himself out of place among the elite circles Mr. Hawthorne frequented. But he adapted quickly, drawing strength from the values instilled in him during his difficult childhood. Meanwhile, news of Eli's rise spread throughout the village, reaching Aunt Clara and her family. Initially dismissive, they soon grew envious, realizing too late the mistake they had made in mistreating him. Greta and Lars, now grown and struggling to find their footing in life, spoke fondly of their cousin, hoping to reconnect. Even Aunt Clara softened her stance, though her motives remained suspect. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and turn on post notification bell to know when we drop a new video.